So, they did it. They actually did it.
You crazy son of a bitch, you did.
Over the weekend, Sony unveiled this year's PlayStation State of Play event, showcasing many new titles releasing in the near future. Arguably, the biggest and most anticipated announcement came in the form of the PlayStation VR 2. This next step in virtual reality gaming blew fans away with all the new innovations and titles that would be launching with. I'm joking, of course, we only care about the Resident Evil 4 remake. I have to say, although it should have been obvious we were going to be getting an RE4 remake, with Village blatantly teasing how a potential remake would look and act, I honestly didn't think Capcom had the balls to actually tinker with a game that is regarded by many to be one of the greatest video games of all time. But I guess anything is possible with huge amounts of money on the line. For anyone familiar with this channel, you might think that due to this video I made, I resent Capcom for remaking Resident Evil 4, but I can assure you that isn't the case. I made that video to show everyone that all in all, the game didn't need to be remade. It obviously wasn't made as a protest to Capcom, like they'd actually care what a random guy from England had to say. Well guys, I know we've been working hard on this remake, but I think we should pull the plug. This guy has a problem with it. I'm not gonna lie though, I was and still am pretty skeptical as to how this game will turn out. The trailer, although it didn't show much, gave us all just enough to get a glimpse at what to expect tone-wise, as well as giving us a look at some of the new appearances for the beloved characters of this game, as well as Ashley. So far from what we've seen though, I'd say I'm both nervous and excited at the same time. I am very happy to see the return of Nick Apostolides, who voiced Leon in the RE2 remake, although I'm pretty sure a lot of people were begging for Paul Mercier to make a return. He ain't my Leon. It's natural for a remake to change its voice actors. I mean, we've already become accustomed to this with Resident Evil over the years. Take Chris Redfield for example, the man with about 80 different voices. Although of course we want this to be a great game and live up to the hype, we also have to be realistic and understand that this could potentially be a disaster. We all have our own ideas on what to expect with this remake, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Hopefully Capcom realises that fans are still hurting from the RE3 remake and understand that they can't cut any corners with this game. There are certain things that Capcom can't afford to mess up, especially if they want to keep the franchise moving forward after this game, which is why I'm going to be talking about things the Resident Evil 4 remake needs to get right. Everyone can agree that Resident Evil 4 did not feel like a traditional Resident Evil game, and the biggest reason for this was the focus on combat. Combat was always secondary in Resident Evil, as the games were always focused on puzzle solving above all else. Resident Evil 4 changed this forever. Combat has since become a huge aspect of Resident Evil, thanks to the slick and satisfying mechanics of 4. This game paved the way for so many innovations that would become staples of the franchise, and ones that gave 4 such a unique personality for its time. Increased inventory, weapon upgrades, and of course being able to perform stylish takedowns like a ninja ballerina. Now the RE4 remake will almost certainly not use the tank control scheme found in classic Resident Evil games, as over the years Capcom has moved away from this, opting instead for a control scheme that allows for a lot more movement and fluidity, which begs the question, will Capcom keep the takedown system? It's hard to tell as the trailer didn't touch on any combat mechanics, but for me it's a no-brainer keeping the finishers in. They are without a doubt some of the most satisfying things to pull off in any Resident Evil game. These moves aren't just there to look flashy, as they also massively help you in tough situations. They essentially act as a means of crowd control, as hitting or kicking an enemy into other enemies causes all of those hit to get stunned, giving you some time to reload or to find a better position. From the trailer, it seems like enemy numbers are still going to be very high. If this remake is going to capture the anxiety of being surrounded by tons of enemies at once, then it needs these finishers to help balance things out. The upgrade system is also something that needs to remain intact. Whilst I enjoyed seeing the return of upgrades in Resident Evil Village, the fact that parts were needed if you wanted to upgrade your weapons any further was pretty annoying, and it never really felt like upgrades made a difference. In 4, however, every upgrade counted. Enemies were constantly getting stronger and deadlier, so keeping your arsenal powerful was a must. If the remake is going to be combat heavy, then this is a must. My boy the Merchant better be giving me the sickest upgrades on the market. Another thing that's been playing on my mind is whether or not we will see the return of Old Reliable, aka the god tier combat knife. Having Resident Evil 4's combat knife by your side is like having your best buddy by your side. I mean, it's much better than having Ashley by your side, I can tell you that for free. In a game full of enemies, you need something that can help you save ammo for the bigger baddies later down the line, and the knife was the thing that helped you do this. For those who have never played RE4, you may be thinking, how can a knife be better than a gun? Well, I'll tell you, you uneducated swine. RE4's knife is no ordinary knife. It was forged in fire by God himself, who bestowed it upon Leon to carry out his judgment. The combat knife is great in most situations, acting as a way to stun enemies, as well as being able to finish them off. It's also for some some reason very handy against bosses. Capcom better have kept this absolute beast in the game. We don't need another crappy watered down version like in Resident Evil 5. The best Resident Evil games for me have always been able to create a dark tone with their twisted visuals and monsters. The number one priority for a survival horror game must always be the horror side of the game. Nothing has to be overtly scary to the point where the player is jump scared every 2 seconds, but subtly creeping the player out with visuals, sounds, and lack of sounds is realistically what you want when playing a survival horror game. The trailer released for Resident Evil 4 Remake has demonstrated just how the RE engine can enhance the tense atmosphere of the original. This brand new engine has the potential to take these already beautifully terrifying locations and transform them into even more horrifying works of art. Enemy designs were a huge part of making 4 a scary experience for a lot of people, and it's essential the remake recaptures this magic. The enemies in 4 are some of the most iconic in gaming thanks to their unique designs, which is why I hope Capcom tried their hardest not to redesign them. I know they were probably itching to do so, but the way some of their designs have backfired in the past has hopefully steered them more in the direction of enhancing already established designs. Don't be putting a crooked nose on the Regenerator. Village proved to us that Resident Evil 4 could work on a new engine, and I'd be happy to see similar design choices from 8 make it into 4. The weather effects in that game were also incredible visually, and seeing how much the weather changes in 4 means Capcom has to use these features in the remake. Just think the game could be made so much scarier just by having fog obscure your vision in certain areas. This would work great in locations like the village or even the lake where you have to fight Del Lago, as not being able to clearly see the enemies around you would make for some tense situations. From what we saw in the trailer, the setting was also very dark with very few sources of light. To me, this level design resembled that of early concepts for Resident Evil 4, where there was no natural forms of lighting and instead you had to rely on candlelight and your torch. Having to rely solely on yourself to see where you are going is a terrifying thought and definitely adds fear to an already stressful situation. Fighting enemies is one thing, but not being able to see them is another. I've probably said this a million times on this channel, but Capcom really do have a habit of taking too much out of their remakes. I'm not saying I'm against taking unnecessary segments out of games that don't translate well into the style of gameplay the new version is going for, but when you start to take more than you add, then what's the point in the remake? It's just like playing a beta version of the original. By now everyone knows that Resident Evil 4's pacing is pretty great. The game keeps you on your toes, moving from one place to another fairly quickly, which let Capcom experiment with a variety of areas and locations, keeping the experience fresh throughout. Although you do backtrack in the game, it isn't for very long, and there is a purpose to doing so, such as opening doors to other areas. What I'm trying to say is that every area has a purpose. Each area is designed a certain way and has its own enemies and personality, so Capcom really needs to be careful when either designing these areas or straight up deleting them. As I mentioned earlier, the enemy variety plays a huge part in Resident Evil. There are so many enemies that act and look different, which makes each encounter with them feel special. It feels like a lot of these enemies have a specific role in this twisted world, and each time the player meets a new enemy, they can guarantee there is something much worse waiting for them around the corner. Everyone has their favourite enemies from Resident Evil 4, and it would be a shame if Capcom gave any of them the axe. The original Resident Evil remake is a great example of a remake in my opinion. That remake added rather than took away, and because of this, it is regarded as one of the best games in the franchise. It would be great if the Resident Evil 4 remake included some new enemies, perhaps adding ones that did not make it into the final cut of the original. This is most definitely the time to add elements from the original concept of RE4, especially if this version is going for a more horror-themed approach. Adding new areas and enemies also opens the doors to the possibility of adding more Ada and Ashley segments into the game. I know I've slated her in the past for being one of the most annoying parts of the game, but this remake could finally make her shine. The segment where you play as Ashley in the original was arguably one of the most tense and creepy parts of the game, and I hope the remake adds more sequences like this. Disarming the player and having them literally run for their lives from danger has to be replicated for this remake. Ada's campaign was also a huge part of Resident Evil 4. Seeing things from her perspective was a great twist, and it would be great if the remake could expand upon this. Resident Evil 4 has a very unique character roster, as well as reinventing franchise veterans to make them more suitable in the action genre. It introduced many new ones that are still loved by fans to this day. Whilst a lot of them are not particularly special, they add so much to the world of the game and give off such a strange and, at times, humorous tone. I mean, a lot of them are pretty terrifying, but every so often they come across as unintentionally funny. That's not a bad thing. It added to the over-the-top nature of the game, and hopefully the remake isn't afraid to embrace some of the cheesier parts of the original. Resident Evil has proven it can have humour sprinkled throughout its games.
This is Nathaniel Bard. Open the door, please.
No voice match found.
so it wouldn't hurt to include some of that humour in the remake. If they are planning to change the fate or personality of any of the characters, then I'm betting on it being Louise. Whilst the original game was greatly paced, Louise's death did feel pretty anticlimactic, and seeing as how he will be making a return in this game, I hope they do him justice. But this does also come with the risk of Capcom doing another Brad Vickers on us. The one character they can't get wrong is our boy Leon. Leon is without a doubt one of the most iconic aspects of Resident Evil ever, and it's all thanks to this game. I'm fairly confident that Capcom will succeed in making Leon a badass once again, as despite the past remakes having their issues, I found the characters to be really likeable and a big improvement from the original incarnations. It will be interesting to see if they do change anything about his personality in 4, not by making him fearful of everything, but perhaps making him react in realistic ways like how he was portrayed in Resident Evil 2. Fingers crossed they leave in all of his Sigma moments. What an absolute gamer. I don't think I've ever been this excited or nervous for a game ever, although I'm very unsure how the product will turn out. I think I'm more nervous for how the fanbase as a whole will react. Resident Evil 4 has never been my favourite in the series, but I still think it's a great game. I know that Resident Evil 4 is special to a lot of people, and I really do hope the game delivers a great experience for all of our sakes. And who knows, maybe if this game is a success, then they'll release it on every console and platform like they did with the original, finally giving me the chance to play the game in a Tesla.